The marble floors of the Lexington estate glistened like mirrors, cold and untouchable, much like the man who owned them. Alexander Lexington, billionaire tycoon and head of the Lexington Corporation, lived in a fortress of steel, glass, and loneliness. His empire spanned continents, yet within the high walls of his mansion, silence reigned. There was only one person who had ever managed to break through that silence: his son, Ethan. But even Ethan lived in a world of his own. At 7 years old, Ethan was autistic. He rarely spoke, rarely looked anyone in the eye, and his emotions often came out in violent bursts that left Alexander both helpless and frustrated. The boy's mother had left long ago, unable to handle the weight of raising a child who demanded more patience than she could give. That left Alexander, a man who could sign billion-dollar deals with a flick of his pen, but couldn't calm his own son's screams at night. The mansion's staff rotated often, many leaving within weeks of meeting Ethan. His meltdowns, his silence, his sudden movements frightened them. But one person had remained: Amara. She was not like the others. Her presence was soft, steady, unshaken by Ethan's storms. Amara was a young black woman who had come from humble beginnings, hired initially to clean floors and polish silver. But she had a way with Ethan that no one else did. She did not flinch when he screamed, nor scold when he threw his toys. She waited. She listened. She saw the boy beneath the behaviors. Alexander noticed her, though he never admitted it. The way she knelt to Ethan's level, the way she hummed softly when the boy rocked back and forth, the way Ethan, his difficult, unreachable son, sometimes allowed her to hold his hand. It stirred something in him, something he buried beneath layers of steel and pride. But everything changed one late afternoon. The storm had rolled in suddenly, rain lashing against the mansion's tall windows. Alexander had been in his study, signing documents, when he heard it: a piercing scream. It wasn't the usual cry of frustration Ethan often gave. It was sharper, painful, terrifying. He dropped his pen and ran. By the time he reached the east hallway, his heart froze. Ethan was on the floor, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Shards of broken glass lay scattered around him. He must have knocked over one of the tall vases in his frenzy. His small body trembled, his face pale. And there, crouched beside him, was Amara. She had thrown aside her cleaning cloths and was cradling Ethan's head in her lap, pressing her apron against the wound to stop the bleeding. Her dark hands shook slightly, not from fear, but urgency. Her eyes, deep, warm, unflinching, were focused entirely on Ethan. "It's okay, baby, I got you," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Shh. You're safe. You're safe with me." Ethan's small hands clutched her arm tightly, his nails digging into her skin. But he wasn't screaming anymore. His breathing came in quick gasps, tears streaking his cheeks, but he was looking, truly looking, into her face. Alexander stood frozen at the edge of the scene. He had never seen Ethan cling to anyone like that, not even to him. Blood dripped through the fabric of Amara's apron. She pressed harder, humming softly, her forehead bent low over the boy's. "We need to stop the bleeding," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "You're strong, Ethan. Stay with me." Finally, Alexander moved, rushing forward. "I'll call the doctor." "Not just the doctor, sir." "Now," Amara cut him off firmly, surprising him. "He needs the hospital. The cut is deep." Her tone was respectful, but unwavering. For a moment, Alexander felt as if he wasn't the one in control. She was. And strangely, he trusted her. Within minutes, the driver had the car ready. Amara climbed in with Ethan still in her arms, refusing to let him go, even when Alexander tried. "He's calm with me," she said quietly, her voice steady but urgent. "Please, let me." Alexander, a man never used to hearing the word please from his staff, simply nodded. The ride to the hospital was silent except for Ethan's soft whimpers and Amara's hushed reassurances. Alexander sat opposite them, watching the scene unfold like a stranger in his own life. Ethan's small face pressed into Amara's chest, his tears soaking her blouse. Her hand stroked his hair, and though blood stained her apron, she held him as though the mess didn't matter. As though nothing else in the world mattered but the boy in her arms. Something inside Alexander cracked. He thought of all the times he had stood helpless while Ethan cried. All the times he had turned to nannies, specialists, therapists, anyone who could fix what he could not. And here was this woman, this maid holding his son like he was the most precious thing in the world. The weight of it hit him like thunder. At the hospital, doctors rushed Ethan into emergency care. Amara stood back, her apron soaked, her hands trembling now that the crisis was in someone else's control. Alexander found himself watching her instead of the doctors. Her eyes were red, but not from fear, rather from the depth of her empathy. She whispered prayers under her breath, fingers clutching the small silver cross at her neck. When the doctor finally came out and assured them that Ethan would be fine, a few stitches, nothing life-threatening. Alexander exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He turned to Amara. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. He saw her strength, her courage, and above all, her love for a child who wasn't even hers. "Thank you," he said softly, the words foreign on his tongue. Amara shook her head. "You don't need to thank me, sir. He needed me. That's all." But Alexander knew it was more, much more. That night back at the mansion, Ethan lay asleep in his bed, his forehead bandaged. Alexander stood at the doorway, watching his son breathe. Amara sat at the bedside, humming softly, refusing to leave until the boy was fully settled. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something stir in his chest. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something warmer, something deeper, something terrifying. And he knew, without a doubt, that this woman had just changed everything. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the mansion's towering windows, casting golden lines across the polished floors. The storm had passed, but the air inside was still heavy with what had happened. Alexander had not slept much. He had spent most of the night pacing his study, replaying the image of Amara holding Ethan in her arms. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blood, the trembling, and then her strength. It unnerved him. It humbled him. When he finally entered Ethan's room, he found the boy still asleep, his small hand resting against the blanket. Amara was there too, curled in the chair beside the bed, her head tilted slightly as she dozed. She had stayed. Something inside Alexander softened at the sight. Most of his staff would have left as soon as their shift ended. But Amara, she had chosen to remain. She had chosen Ethan over her own comfort. He cleared his throat gently. "Amara!" Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked confused, as though she had forgotten where she was. Then she saw Ethan, and her expression softened. She straightened quickly. "Sir, I must have dozed off. I didn't mean—" Alexander raised a hand. "Don't apologize." The silence that followed was strange. Alexander was a man who thrived on control, on commanding the room. Yet with Amara, he found himself searching for words. Finally, he said, "You were remarkable yesterday. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here." Amara lowered her gaze, her dark lashes brushing her cheeks. "I only did what anyone would, sir." "No," Alexander said firmly. "Not anyone. Most people would have frozen or fled. You didn't." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but she didn't answer. As the days passed, Alexander began noticing things he had overlooked before. Ethan, though still withdrawn, sought Amara out more often. He would hover near her while she cleaned, sometimes tugging gently at her apron until she stopped to acknowledge him. She spoke to him patiently, never demanding words but always offering them. "Would you like to help me fold this, Ethan?" she would ask softly. And though Ethan rarely replied, he would sit nearby, touching the edges of the fabric as though mimicking her. Alexander watched these interactions from the shadows of doorways, a strange ache in his chest. He realized how often he had tried to manage Ethan through control, through logic, through hiring specialists. Yet Amara reached him with something far simpler: tenderness. One evening, Alexander approached her as she was arranging fresh flowers in the foyer. "Amara," he began, his voice low, "how do you do it? How do you reach him?" She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "I don't reach him, sir," she said gently. "I just meet him where he is. Ethan doesn't need to be forced into our world. We need to step into his." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He stood silent for a long moment, then nodded. You make it sound so simple. It isn't simple, she admitted, smiling faintly. It's just love. And patience. Alexander's throat tightened. Two things he realized he hadn't given his son nearly enough. One night, weeks after the accident, Alexander returned home late from a board meeting. The mansion was quiet, the halls dim. As he made his way upstairs, he heard soft laughter, a sound he almost didn't recognize. It was Ethan. Alexander followed the sound to the library, and what he saw stopped him cold. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, a pile of blocks in front of him. Amara sat opposite, her eyes bright as she gently guided his hands. Ethan was giggling, every time the tower of blocks collapsed. Alexander leaned against the doorway, stunned. His son, who rarely smiled, who lived behind walls of silence, was laughing. Amara glanced up and noticed him. For a moment their eyes met. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of what she had given his son and what she was unknowingly giving him. He swallowed hard. He's happy. Amara's smile widened. Yes, sir. He is. For the first time in years, Alexander felt his own lips curve into something resembling a smile. But the more he watched, the more he felt something dangerous blooming inside him. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was the way Amara's laughter lit the room, the way her voice soothed the storm inside Ethan, and inside him. It was the quiet strength she carried, the dignity in her simplicity. Alexander had been with women before, models, heiresses, socialites. They had chased his wealth, his name, his power. But Amara, she was different. She didn't want anything from him. She gave without expectation, and that terrified him. One evening after Ethan had fallen asleep, Alexander found himself standing on the balcony, staring into the night. He heard footsteps behind him. Amara stepped out, carrying a tray with tea. I thought you might need this, she said softly. He turned, surprised. You didn't have to. I know, she replied, setting the tray down. But you seem burdened tonight. He let out a low, humorless laugh. Burdened is one way to put it. I run an empire worth billions, yet I can't manage to be a proper father to one little boy. Amara's gaze softened. Don't be so hard on yourself, sir. Ethan doesn't need perfection. He needs presence. And you are here. Her words pierced him. He stared at her, the night air cool against his skin, and for a moment he forgot the distance between them, the billionaire and the maid. Amara, he said quietly, his voice rough, I don't know what I'd do without you. She blinked, taken aback. Sir? Their eyes locked and the silence stretched, heavy with something unspoken. Amara looked away first, her cheeks flushed. Ethan needs me, not you. That's all that matters. But Alexander knew it wasn't true. Something far deeper was unfolding. And though he fought it, though pride and fear told him it was impossible, he couldn't deny it anymore. He was falling. The days turned into weeks, and the mansion began to change. It wasn't the decor, or the staff, or the endless luxury that shifted. It was the atmosphere. The silence that once suffocated every hallway was now broken by the sound of Ethan's small giggles, his footsteps running toward Amara whenever she entered a room. Alexander noticed how his son blossomed in her presence. He was calmer, more trusting. For the first time, Ethan held someone's hand without resistance, leaned against someone's shoulder without flinching. And Alexander, though grateful, felt the pang of envy deep inside, because it wasn't him. One evening, after a long day at the office, Alexander came home to find Amara sitting on the living room carpet with Ethan. They were painting. Colorful strokes covered the large canvas spread out before them. Ethan's hands were smeared with blue and green, his laughter bubbling each time Amara made a silly face with the brush. Alexander paused at the doorway watching. He had never seen such life in his son. He had never seen her shine like this, her natural beauty unmasked by fancy gowns or jewelry. She was radiant in her simplicity, in the way she made his house feel like a home. Daddy! The word was soft but clear. Alexander's heart stopped. Ethan had spoken. His son, who rarely uttered more than a murmur, had just called him Daddy. Alexander's throat tightened, tears threatening his composure. He knelt beside them, his eyes locked on his son. "Ethan, you—" The boy smiled faintly, his hand reaching toward Amara, as if to pull her into the moment too. And Alexander understood. Ethan's progress wasn't his alone. It was Amara's gift. Later that night, when Ethan was asleep, Alexander found Amara in the kitchen, washing brushes from their painting session. "You've given me something I never thought I'd have," he said quietly. Amara looked up, startled. "Sir? My son." His laughter, his words. "You've brought him back to me." His voice cracked with raw honesty. "And I don't know how to thank you." Her hand stilled on the brush. "You don't need to. I care for Ethan because he deserves it. Not for thanks, not for reward." Alexander stepped closer, his chest heavy with words he had held back for too long. "Amara, it's more than that. I see you. I see the way you love him, the way you give without expecting anything. And I—" She quickly shook her head, fear flashing in her eyes. "Don't. Please don't say it." "Why not?" His voice was rough, desperate. "Because I'm a billionaire and you're a maid? Because our worlds are different? Do you think I care about that?" Amara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "It's not just that, sir. It's Ethan. He needs stability, not complications. And if people find out, let them," Alexander cut in sharply, "let them say what they want. I've built empires, Amara. Do you think I'll let society dictate who I can or cannot love?" The word hung in the air like thunder. "Love." Amara's breath caught, her eyes wide. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said firmly, stepping closer. "I've had everything money can buy, and none of it has ever mattered. Not until you. You, Amara. You and Ethan. You've shown me what I was missing all along." Her resolve faltered. He could see it in the trembling of her hands, in the way her lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came out. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I don't belong in your world." Alexander reached out, gently taking her hand. "Then let me belong in yours." In that moment, something broke inside her walls. All the fear, the hesitation, the doubts, washed away by the sincerity in his voice. Amara had spent her whole life overlooked, underestimated, judged by the color of her skin and the weight of her status. But here was the richest man she had ever known, holding her hand like it was the most valuable thing he'd ever touched. Her heart warred with her mind. But when she thought of Ethan, of his laughter, of the way his little hands clung to her apron, she knew the truth. She wasn't just part of his healing. She was part of his family. From that night on, the household shifted even more. Alexander was no longer a distant shadow in Ethan's life. Guided by Amara, he learned patience, learned how to sit with his son without forcing him into uncomfortable spaces. He learned how to wait for Ethan's gaze, how to celebrate his smallest victories. There were setbacks, of course, nights when Ethan screamed, mornings when he refused to eat. But they faced them together, Alexander, Amara, and Ethan, as a unit. For the first time, Alexander didn't feel alone. Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Alexander found himself standing in the garden with Amara by his side. Ethan was running ahead, chasing leaves that swirled in the breeze. His laughter echoed like music. Alexander turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Do you know what you've given me?" She smiled gently. "What's that?" "A reason to live beyond business. A reason to breathe beyond wealth. You've given me a family." Her eyes glistened, her lips parting with emotion. "And you've given me a place where I belong." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Stay with us, Amara. Not as a maid, not as staff, but as the woman I love, as Ethan's mother, as my partner." Her heart thudded wildly. For so long she had feared this moment, feared the gap between their worlds. But standing there with Ethan's laughter filling the air, she realized there was no gap, not anymore. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she was the most priceless treasure he had ever owned. Ethan, noticing, ran toward them, giggling as he wrapped his small arms around both their legs. In that embrace under the golden autumn sky, a billionaire, a maid, and a little boy found something that no amount of wealth or status could ever buy. Love. Real, raw, unshakable. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Lexington felt whole.